All right, so now that Dana has joined us, we have 4 members present. So Dan, do you want to hit the record button? Okay, it says Dan started recording. And the stream is live. I see it's a nice new feature there in the corner to pop up. So welcome everybody to our meeting of the Business and Finance Subcommittee. Our meeting is called to order, and thank you to Lauren for agreeing to take the minutes this evening. So our first item on the agenda is a review of special education expenditures. All fund codes is on the agenda, and just to give some context to where this came from, when we were reviewing grants 2 meetings ago, I believe, we noticed that Christine had, or whomever had entered a supply line item, for lack of a better word. I'm going to be using the wrong term. That was substantive and seemed like it was new this year. And as business and finance, I think what we just wanted to understand was, if there was monies that were newly being spent, our question often as a subcommittee is, is it sustainable? Is it something that's a one-time expense? Is it something that we're anticipating seeing in next year's budget? So I know Dan had invited Christine here today to talk a little bit about that, and also anything else that she and Dan wish to share with the committee with respect to our SPED expenditures. So with that somewhat context setting, perhaps not correctly, I can turn the floor over to Dan and/or Christine to lead the discussion.
All right, so thanks, Ken, very much. Pretty much hit the nail on the head there. So in your packet, which I'll put up in a second, I included a number of budget reports from FY21 and FY22, as well as I shared with you the expenditures from the general fund from FY21 and the estimated expenditures for 22. And as Ken said, when we were reviewing the grants for FY22, there was a variation in the tuitions from 1.5 and a 240 grant to approximately $1 million. But as you saw in the packet, and I'll put it up in a second, couple things. Number one, as I had stated in the fall, we brought forward in tuitions this year approximately $1.7 million in circuit breaker. Number two, we brought forward approximately $483,000 and change from the FY21 240 grant. And the reason for that, again, as we had talked about in the past, is that we were looking to make maintenance of efforts. And so we made adjustments at the end of the year. And then number three, as part of the stimulus packet, if you will, Christine also received an additional grant this year, and in that grant is approximately $300,000 and allocated for tuition. So with all that, as Christine worked on the 22 240 grant, she was able to make that adjustment from the 1.5 to approximately 1 million, and then to reallocate approximately $500,000 throughout the grant. So as is the case, I'll be quiet for a minute or two or three. I'll put it up on the screen, and I'm going to pass the baton to Christine Smith.
Hi guys. So I wish that the grants were mine, but they aren't. Right? Whatever. But they are money coming into the district that we determined that one of the best ways to address some of the needs of COVID and the impact of COVID was to get some training and more curriculum materials into the hands of our teachers. So Ken, when you're talking about the supply line, I know Dan spoke about the tuitions line, but if you're talking about the supply line that was in the different grants, we have been working diligently on creating more transition-like experiences in the classrooms, in our developmental classrooms and in our ABA classrooms. So we bought like a whole setup to make vocational experiences that we weren't able to do before. So whether that was everything from a vacuum to teaching skills around setting the table and buying the equipment for that. There was some purchasing of furniture for a classroom at the high school that and the post-grad program that became larger. There's also been a lot of, as I said earlier, curriculum and then training associated with that curriculum, so that we are moving more and more towards evidence-based curriculum, so that our goals and objectives are much more measurable and our evidence of student growth is more measurable in those areas of specially designed instruction. So I don't see a real this equipment is due to expire at a certain point. It's curriculum material that has will have life in the classroom, and then may or may not be needed to be replaced or turned into some other kind of experience for the students. Did that address sort of what your questions were, Ken, or to the committee?
Let me answer that question and then pass it on to other people that are on the call. I mean, I
Sure.
think so. Like the page that Dan has up right now, right? There is that, I'm gonna look at it on my own computer so I can make it a little bit bigger. But there's the instructional line, right? That's $408,000, and the PD line is $100,000.
Yeah.
And we have just not seen those in previous years, right? And
Right.
so I think that, at least from my perspective, and others may have other questions, I just wanted to make sure that that this was a one-time thing that we were using to improve instruction. That it wasn't an extra $400,000 or $500,000 that the school committee should be thinking about in its future budgets, increasing the overall instructional line. If this is going to need to be a year-over-year thing, right? Because it's kind of like a one-time found money in a sense, right? Because you were able to reallocate funds out of tuitions. So it doesn't look to me like very much of it has actually been spent, though, right? It looks like of that $408,000, $380,000 is still available.
I see that, and it may just be a function of catching up to that. I know that particularly, which line are you looking at?
I'm looking at the line that's like instructional. So there's a $408,000 original approved budget, which wasn't in the original version. And you talked about buying some plates and some furniture and some
lots of paper plates. Isn't that enough?
which is that's a lot of plates and
that's a lot of plates, guys.
For $408,000. So I'll let others speak first. I won't speak. I won't pretend to speak for Malaya, who I'm sure will join us on her own shortly. I guess some sense of where some of that might be going in terms of details of the curriculum. I mean, it's more of an education question in terms of like the specifics about why this or that, but just a sense of like a broad idea of categories, of types of things that $408,000 should go towards for me, and just that, okay, this is a one-shot thing, and we're not building into the budget, or if we need to, that we at least have the conversation that the instructional line in the general fund needs to go up by $400,000 next year would be a good early warning, I guess.
So Ken, one other grant, I'm sorry, Chris, one other grant I'll get to in a second is, again, one of the stimulus grants, and you'll see the $300,000 and available in tuitions there as well. One of the things that we haven't done yet is that prior to the grant.
That's not in tuitions. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's not
contracted services.
That's right. Thank you.
Contract services. So one of the things that Chris was referring to is that until the grant gets approved, typically Chris spends out of the general fund, and then we make adjustments between the general fund and the grant on the premise that the effective date of the grant is in early September. Because again, we can't spend, we can't make any adjustments if, for example, the effective date of the grant is October 1, then any purchase prior to that remains in the general fund. So that catch-up hockey, I know that one of my staff was looking at that last week to make those adjustments, and those have not been complete yet. She's she's working with Chris's staff to make those adjustments. So that $408,000 that you see there, that number will be reduced. We just haven't completed that exercise yet.
So do other members of the subcommittee want to chime in?
I have a question. Can you walk me through, because I'm still new on the committee, the reallocation that you've mentioned several times of the $500,000?
So that's probably me. So, and what I mean by that is the appropriation. These are entitlement grants, so the number year to year doesn't change a heck of a lot. Last year is approximately 1.6 and change, and this year in 22, it's 1.6 and change. There was a nominal increase. Again, as I said earlier, and I'll bring it up in a second, Chris has a second grant this year, and it's a stimulus grant, if you will, and that expires in a year from now. So either Chris can spend that money this year, or we could carry it forward into FY23. But because she was able to bring forward 1.7 in circuit breaker, and because she was able to bring forward 483,000 and change out of the 240 grant, in essence, the 500,000 that was in the FY21 240 grant for the 1.5 million that was allocated in FY21 for the 240 grant. Chris, in essence, took 500,000 of that and reallocated it, with a big portion of it going to this supply materials line, and then another 100,000 and change going to the PD that you saw there.
Thank you.
Sorry, the mute button. Getting back to that story again.
Wow, we haven't done that for a long time, Ken. That was like early days of pandemic, right?
But still more used to Zoom than meets. So I guess the opportunity, I guess, here is, I think, for positive storytelling, right? So the positive storytelling potentially counteracting negative storytelling, right? So on this subcommittee, we've been discussing the maintenance of effort, issue for a while, and other members of the subcommittee have brought up, well, it's good that we're meeting this minimum, but it would be nice if we could be spending money, where it needs to be spent in special education, rather than, meeting a minimum maintenance of effort. And it seems as though we're doing some of that right here, right? That we're making some headway into making some positive expenditures, be it in instructional support or in professional development. And I guess it'd be good if, in this context or a soon context, we could learn a few more details about what some of those investments are, because I think it's a good story to tell, right, to our special education community and to our communities writ large, about how the district is making use of these federal funds to make the kids' experience, better.
Sure, I can do that. It sounds like you want a slideshow of pictures.
A little bit, yeah, pictures or some sense of if it's $100,000 in PD is a good amount of PD, right? So some sense of what are our staff learning with this money, and what curriculum is getting purchased with the instructional stuff, right? That they're being trained on with the PD, to make the kids have a better experience. It seems as though there's a short good story to tell there, right?
I hear you.
For our communities, that was, I think, kind of one of the main, aside from my money hat saying, okay, let's make sure this isn't a revolving expense, and if so, let's account for it. I think telling those sort of stories in a nice, clear, succinct way is what I think was driving some other people in the subcommittee, right, to want to have you come in and share some of that share some of that information.
And to put it into context for the members of the committee and for those who are here this evening, what Ken is asking, again, I don't want to speak for you, Ken, but is basically for special education to speak to the investments that technology made. Barry Sklar came in to present to us probably 3-4 months ago. They all seem to run together now, and he gave a really nice presentation that evening. And Ken thought it was really important too, as we were gearing up for the 23 budget, to tell the story to the public on we received these funds through ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and other areas, and how we made those investments. And we've also made investments too in our buildings, and with our HVAC work. And again, we've talked about this here, and I think in previous meetings we talked about the investment next door at ECC with almost $100,000 in having some work done there as well. So I think that certainly would help as well as we go forward and look to share and, if I may use the term, sell the budget to the towns for FY23.
If I was sitting on a finance committee, I guess questions I would say is, because I'm sure the finance committee would be more elegant than this, but I'd say, y'all got a lot of money from the federal government, right? Why? And we're not seeing our assessments greatly reduced, right? What are y'all spending the money on? I think Barry did a good job, and I'm sure that other people helped, with having a one-pager, right? There was like a one-page of here's all how we got ahead of the game in our advancements of technology, right? We bought these Chromebooks. We're now in, have one-to-one in the middle schools. That we wouldn't have had that opportunity for those kids in 6th grade right now, or whomever, if we hadn't made this intelligent investment in our students. I think what Dan's alluding to is something else this subcommittee has asked for, which is sort of an equivalent one-pager for the HVAC, right? To say to the towns, a very short story, not buried in numbers, of down the road, we would either ask you directly through a capital expense or indirectly through your assessments to replace this, that, and the other thing. And because of our sound investments with the stimulus money, not only are the buildings better for your kids now and better for the employees now, many of whom are residents, but we're probably not going to have to ask for as much money downstream, right, to pay for these things out of the general fund. And I think for special ed, again, a one-pager, simple story of, yes, we got money from the federal government, whether it's direct or indirect, in terms of, I know that this grant doesn't change very much from year to year, but indirectly there was money left over because of other money coming into the district. Here's how we were able to make special education in this district better this year from some of these monies that are from the federal government. And I think being able to tell a very short, factual, data-driven, but not data-deluged story about those things allow us to counteract factually arguments that might be made about, hey, you all got a lot of money, why aren't we just reducing the assessments? Well, the money we can't use to reduce the assessments because it was targeted, right, to very specific needs. Here are these specific needs that they could fund. Here's how the schools are better because of it. Here's how your towns are better because of it. Here's where maybe in some cases we might be able to not spend more money later because of it. So I think the model that Barry had for that one pager, it was something we might want to reproduce for at least the HVAC stuff. I don't know if special ed can be boiled down that simply or not, or if it's quite equivalent. But I think those are the stories it's good to be able to tell, good stories, right? And there are things that Daryl might want to have a slide for, right, when he goes to the towns in a few weeks, to say, okay, to get ahead of that question and be like, here's targeted investments we made in your buildings for your people, right? So I think I'm going to try and send a
Thank
quick.
you for that, Ken.
And Randy's not on. Malaya is asking for the link. Let me see if I can send her the link.
So Kim, let me see if I can send her the link. Or...
I'm getting there.
I just forwarded it to her. I had it already copied. I just forwarded it to her email.
Sorry, I just clicked in my calendar, so I didn't have. Thank you. So, does anybody else have any questions, or Daryl, do you have anything to add, or Jane, since you're on the call?
Just real quick, we're pretty fortunate that we've been able to get these one-time funds to give us these opportunities. So again, it's beneficial for us to try to use these in a way that will give us some lasting effects. So I know Chris has really been focused on that. I do think it's a good idea, Ken. The one pagers also are a great way to transition into slides that I can share with the towns.
So if we think that's a reasonable thing to do, where do we think we could best deliver that? Is that something that could go? I mean, it's information that I suspect y'all have. Putting it together, I don't think it's super heavy lift, right? Is that something that could be in your report, Daryl, for an upcoming meeting, or do you think it should come here first?
In all honesty, I think we could put them into a report. I guess for Dan, what we might be able to do, Dan, for the HVAC stuff, whether or not you want to have that for facilities and security first, or you could just share it with that group. But we could definitely put something together and put it out for school committee at either the next meeting or the meeting after.
All right, so does anybody have any other questions on these topics before we move on our agenda? All right. Next item on our agenda then is the update fiscal year 22 general fund. So revenue and then expense. And if anyone plans to drop off the line, thank you for joining us tonight. Dan, do you want to drive the bus on leading us through, the high level picture here?
Sure. For the folks who are here this evening for the first time, I think we use the terminology, the elevator overview. Kamara's laughing. But I think that got us through the evening. So we'll start on floor 10, if you will. We'll go up to the 50th floor. Little levity there, folks. Absolutely. So the first item here is the revenues. In one item that I do want to bring to the committee's attention that I spoke about in my executive summary are Medicaid receipts. And for those who were been around for a couple of years, we had we had an issue a couple of years ago when we first came on board with the Medicaid receipts, and actually at the suggestion of Chair Mills, we went out and we hired a Medicaid coordinator, Sue Soper, and Sue has done tremendous work. And as I wrote in my executive summary, with the payment that we are scheduled to receive probably next week or so. Dr. McCall received a letter on the 11th, $552,031.07. We will have exceeded our benchmark for the year. And we still have the March and the June disbursements as well. As I've said in the past, the interest this year is it probably will not hit the benchmark. So having the Medicaid receipts exceeding it will certainly help on the revenue side. And as I've also stated in the past, the miscellaneous, these are the the reimbursements that we receive from the towns for transportation. We were slow out of the gates last year. And this year, again, we're slow out of the gates. Hopefully that as we go through the year, we'll pick up those receipts from the towns. Again, this is something that my office works with special education to coordinate the billings. And again, we provide these services, the transportation services to students who are attending the DevRel program. And these students are from districts across the Commonwealth. So, and then last but not least, in terms of the revenues, we should be receiving probably early next month. Although, again, the past couple of years, for a number of different reasons, our first disbursement for regional transportation. And as, again, the committee knows, we squared up, if you will, with DESE last year in terms of the repayment. Again, something that, when I came on board, we were overpaid approximately $275,000. So that's behind us. And again, we hopefully will receive the first disbursement again, probably in early February, and then the second disbursement would be in June for the year. And that issue is a non-issue. DESE approved the methodology that I submitted to them the better part of 3+ years ago. Be happy to answer any questions on the revenue side.
People from the subcommittee have a question on the table. I guess I just have a brief observation, not really a question. You all know more about money than I do, so I'm thinking about it from a simpler finance perspective. It strikes me that we need to be prepared in upcoming years for the fact that we might get less revenue from Medicare if our expenses go down, but at the same time, I would think our expenses would also go down, so those seem connected. So I think as long as we have those somewhere mentally connected in our heads, that we should be okay. But I imagine that we might have less expenses going forward, I don't know, than we did this year.
It's a good point, and I think we spoke about this at our last meeting. Again, the Medicaid receipts, one of the reasons that our receipts are so robust, if you will, is because the feds and the state have allowed us to put in for COVID-related costs that go back, to March of 2020. And again, I got to believe that probably, if not in 23, but most likely in 24, that we're not going to have that opportunity to put in for those costs. My off the cuff response here is that as we look on the revenues for 23, that would probably keep the figure the same in 23 as we did in 22, because that well will most likely dry if not in 23, probably most definitely in 24.
Right, and Dan, if I can just jump in, I would probably be maybe even a little more conservative, because we're not sure whether or not they're going to allow us to bill back in the same way that we've been able to this past year, which is why Dan said our receipts have been so much greater than what we had anticipated.
And I think, Ken, as we go forward, and we share this information, I think that it's important that we share that same message as well. That one of the benefits, I guess, for lack of a better term, associated with COVID, that's probably not the right term, just off the top of my head, is that our Medicaid receipts have been robust, but it's not going to continue for sure.
Yeah, I know a buzzword many years ago, before Dan's time, was this idea of like a zero balance budget approach to budgeting, and I think that this is a case where it's not exactly the same thing, but that's an important eye, that I think previous times, sometimes we would just move one line from, 1 year into the next year and not like look under the hood as to why that may or may not be a reasonable thing to do. So I think it's good that you're, keeping an eye on that in this regard, because there's going to be, I think, huge variables from year to year, from last year to this year to the year after that, and to what we need and what we're expecting, right? So I think we need to be diligent and not just assuming that next year looks like this year and the year after will look like the year before, etc. Do other people have questions on the revenue side? All right, do you want to take us to the expense side, Dan?
Of the 22 budget, approximately $200,000 in PPE. So we're looking to make those adjustments. Superintendent McCall actually made, again, Jane and myself aware of, again, the other opportunity with FEMA for these dollars out there. So there are dollars to be had, and where we can, and as I've stated in the past, where we're looking to reallocate these expenses here to those grants. And as this committee knows from the past, it was about a year before we were reimbursed approximately $112,000. We received that money last June. I'm just going to scroll down. I'm going to leave the budget report and scroll down, if I may, to my narrative. I thought it was there.
You sent them to us as two separate files, Dan?
What's that?
You sent them to us as two separate files. So.
Oh, okay. Let me get... Let me get a separate folder here. I apologize. All right. So I spoke about undesignated salaries and stipends. Again, there's an unencumbered balance there. There are still adjustments to be made, particularly with the teachers in the mid-year adjustments, approximately $200,000. As I stated here, we couldn't make that adjustment. We couldn't encumber those dollars because it would pull that information, and we'd have a little bit of a problem. We'd be overpaying people. So those mid-year adjustments for the teachers, I believe it's going to be either late February or early March, and that'll be based upon the 91st day. What the summer report doesn't show, though, is, I just want to bring to the committee's attention, is the activity with the subs. We've had challenges to bring in subs, and so we've had to hire a number of per diem subs at approximately $150 a day. Those dollars are not encumbered, so I'll be doing some projections for our next meeting in terms of what the impact will be for the year. Under benefits and insurance, again, we built the 22 budget with the premise that we would use approximately $400,000 from school choice and school lunch between those two funds. We have not made those adjustments yet. In other words, we would charge back to school choice or to school lunch those charges, those insurance charges for staff.
I'm sorry, Director Didi, are you supposed to be presenting something? Because right now what I'm looking at is, looks like your file organization. I don't know if you were presenting the packet or if you, I'm sorry, am I just...
Actually, I'm at this end, I'm seeing my executive summary, and are you not seeing the executive summary?
We're not.
Oh, okay, well, hey.
No, it disappeared.
It disappeared. Let's find it again. How's that?
That looks like it.
Small but good.
We good? All right, can you see it okay? Okay, thank you. All right, benefits insurance, as I said, we have not made the mid-year adjustments between the general fund and school choice and school lunch. And it's going to be my recommendation. I'll speak to Dr. McCall that frankly, with the estimated balance in the general fund, that we hold on to school choice, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit in our meeting here, so that we can bring forward a decent balance in school choice into FY23, because we'll probably need that cash. Instructional support, again, we're projecting that'll be fully expended, or there'll be a nominal balance in instructional support. And the same for operations and maintenance. We've fully encumbered and in essence expended fuel and oil, and I'll talk about fuel and oil when we get into FY23. So, and there are some other projects that we'll be looking at as well. So the balances that you see there will be expended with some projects. I've been speaking with Mr. Wild, Director of Facilities, and there's a project at the high school that they're looking at that may cost about $50,000, doing some work on the doors and the cameras over there. Pupil services, that'll be fully expended. Special education tuitions. Again, it's important to note that when we talk about special education tuitions, so we look at the cumulative number, and not just what's in the general fund. And as the committee knows, and as Chris spoke earlier, we have several funding sources, for addressing sped tuitions between the general fund, circuit breaker, the FY21 240 carry forward, the 22 240 carry forward, as well as this year the $300,000 in stimulus money. What will be important to note as well, and this is something that we'll probably need to look at, as we get, towards the end of the year, is where are we going to land with maintenance of efforts, and that's where we may have to make some adjustments within the general fund, because again, to make maintenance of effort, it reflects expenditures from local and state funds. You cannot factor in federal funds for that calculation. So certainly what is allocated there will be expended. As you saw in the budget report, there was a shortfall in that appropriation because we have not completely made adjustments back to either circuit breaker or to the 252 grant, which has the $300,000 in it. Other operating costs, these are the assessments, school choice out and child school assessments from the Department of Revenue, and we're on target to expend those dollars for the year. There was a nominal change on the cherry sheet when the budget was passed, approximately $20,000. But as I've said in the past, these assessments change in mid-year, and actually, when we speak about school choice, I'll talk about in a second. Transportation, I'm still working with special education. We do need to fine tune the sped transportation expenditures. We just received the invoice from DESE regarding the transportation that they provided in concert with the National Guard. There were some questions, so we're still working to fine tune those numbers for this year. And as the committee knows, we have $1 million that we allocated to our transportation stabilization. That money has been encumbered, and we anticipate that $1 million will be expensed by the middle of March at the latest. Moving forward, the invoice is to AA Transportation, and as the committee knows, we make payments twice a month. So we'll pretty much get that million dollars off the books by March. And then excuse me, then our debt service, again, that's been fully expensed for the year. I think, Ken, we're probably on the 50th floor or thereabouts, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Now let's take a pause there and see what questions people have. So we're going to get more details about the whole National Guard business soon. So to really get to a very high airplane level, like when you go to bed at night, Dan, are you worrying about that? Is that the level of exposure we have, or is it Daryl shaking his head no? Are we going to be okay there?
No, and Chris is still here, but if I remember correctly, and I'll stand corrected, I want to say that the invoice was approximately 45,000 and change thereabouts. And I think that there were some questions on the invoice that we received, and it's only for 1 month, essentially. Chris is shaking her head. Superintendent McCall is shaking his head, and I know Chris reached out to Desi just to get some clarity on the invoice. But from memory, about 45,000 and change. We just need to drill down. Is that correct, Chris?
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
So,
And again, these are funds that we would have expended no matter what on the transportation. So it's already money that we have.
Mm-hmm.
right. I have 2 questions, but I can't see everybody. So, the first is actually related to that with the National Guard and other transportation we had to use earlier in the year. I don't expect you to have this number, but I'm still awaiting word on how much that transportation situation with the special education transportation cost us. I know we had to pay some parents. I know we had to pay extra providers that may or may not have been the same as our contracted rates. We now have the National Guard. It would be great just to know the bottom line of what that cost us over what we would have expected if our normal contract had worked as planned.
So, Melanie, if I may, be happy to get that information for you for the next meeting. To my knowledge, there are no outstanding invoices from parent transportation aside from the normal parent transportation during the year.
Right.
So those should all be in. So I'll work with Christine, and I'll have that for our next meeting.
I appreciate that. I just am curious how much the bottom line cost us to deal with that situation. I know we had a lot.
Yeah, I don't think, Malaya, if I could, that it was something substantial in truth. I think, not all of the parents submitted for payment. We moved quickly to get other vendors to move, to transport the kids. And even those additional vendors have come in. Those routes are coming in. The pricing of those routes is very comparable to Vanpool. And we still have those other vendors transporting our kids because Vanpool doesn't still have the capacity to take on, various routes that we're still using.
Okay, I appreciate that. My other quick question was that I know, Dan, I think you mentioned that we've had to hire a number of per diem subs at a certain rate. I'll look forward to that data. But one of my questions is that just Monday at our last meeting, we got a report about the sub rate going up to, I think, $100 a day, which is different than what you just mentioned for the per diem subs.
So the sub rate, that's
that?
a dated, I'm sorry, I apologize. That's a day-to-day sub, and the per diem, what I was referring to was the building sub. There are buildings that have a building sub, and it's $1.50, $150 a day. Then there's the per diem, which went from $90 to $100 a day.
Okay, so they're different categories.
Yep, they are. Yep.
Okay, at some point I'll sort that out in my head.
Malaya, it's pretty easy. A principal hires a building sub to show up at the building every day with the anticipation that there will be an absence. And so because they've made that commitment over time, they're paid a different rate as per the per diem person who just gets to pick it up.
It's opt-in. Okay. Thank you.
And all the buildings have had the opportunity to hire at least one, if not two, building subs. And I think the high school has several because
I know we hired extra last year because of COVID. Have we? And then at the beginning of this year, we weren't going to do that, but I assume we are now because the rates have changed again.
We are.
Okay.
Yeah, when we started that several months ago now.
Okay.
thank you for clarifying, and I'll look forward to that data of how many and how that works out. So thank you.
Anyone else? Kumar?
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, good. So one quick question. With more folks going out sick lately, even for bus drivers, have any of the companies reached out back to us saying we're really struggling to now fill like the vacancies and gaps?
So I'll
They've
speak to
actually, go ahead,
transportation.
Dan. I mean, Dan, we both had conversations with some of these companies. Chris has as well. Everyone's having these situations where they're running into issues with staffing, transportation companies. I've had several conversations with other superintendents and other school districts who are running into the same issue. So I think right now we've been pretty fortunate. I'm knocking on wood. We haven't had people where we've had to cancel bus routes and so forth. But Dan's been speaking with Pat Collier, who is the head over at. She kind of takes care of all of our routes over at AA. And Dan, what's the most recent update?
We're good. I mean, AA Transportation is not unlike any organization. For them, it gets a little bit complicated because they have snowbird drivers. What does that mean? Drivers who are down south, for the winter months, and they come back in the springtime. But as Dr. McCall stated, we've been very fortunate. We have AA, and I'm just speaking of transportation now. AA has not, knock on wood, called to say, hey, we can't do this because we can't get a driver. They've been doing a lot of juggling. Their office staff is out driving. If I got a transportation problem, I can't make a phone call to maybe 10 o'clock thereabouts, and then at 1:15ish or so, they're out and about again covering. But they're doing what they have to do to serve the district, to serve the students, and we've been fortunate. I did have a conversation with AA last week as well, and actually 2 weeks ago, I check in every week with them on this information. Week ago, they had about 18 people in the queue for training. Again, I'm just focusing on transportation here. 18 people in the queue, but unfortunately, that still takes time. It's the better part of 4 to 5 weeks between the training, then getting the licensure, and then getting out there on the road, either in a bus or in a van. And then the other thing, if you drive around the Worcester area, I'll just speak for AA Transportation. You can't miss those big billboards out on 290. There's one out on 290, and there's one out in Webster Square in the city here for AA Transportation. So they're doing all that they can to get people in, to keep people, and but we've been very, very fortunate. Knock on wood.
Anyone else? All right, so why don't we look at the next item, which is the budget planning.
So Ken, there is no narrative here, but just to share with the committee, and as the group knows, we met with the towns back in December, and we gave them an overview of some of the challenges that we have for FY23. The health insurance cost, the contractual obligations, utilities, and transportation, and we're looking at health insurance rates anywhere between 10 and 14%. Unfortunately, we're not going to, get our definitive number for a number of weeks down the road. but we're looking at significant increases there. We talk about utilities. I shared this with Dr. McCall, I think it was last week. We went out, we're part of the French River Education Center. It's a consortium. And there are 20 districts that participated in this collaborative procurement. We didn't get a single bid. We did not get a single bid. The one bid that came in was from a vendor, and it showed up an hour late. It showed up an hour late, so we had to disqualify it because it was late. And then and I work closely with the procurement coordinator at FREC, as we call it. And when I asked the question, so why didn't Peterson submit a bid? They're our current provider. That provider has been hit with COVID, and he's lost people, and he's lost some key people, and that was just a victim of that. So we're looking to go out to bid again for oil in about 2 weeks. It's already out there. It's in all the appropriate public procurement venues, and we're hoping that we'll have a number for oil in early February. February 3rd, I think, is the award date. But again, 20 school districts, and we weren't able to entertain a single bid. Unbelievable. And actually, we had a bid opening. I haven't shared this with Darryl yet, but we had a bid opening late today for copy paper. And the number came in, and actually, this was for the balance of this year, but also looking for next year. The number came in at about a 45% increase just for copy paper. We're paying now roughly $27 in change per case, and it came in at like 40. WB Mason came at like $45 a case. We went and we checked the state website for copy paper, and on the state website for copy paper, it's pretty much the same number. About $44 to $48 a case for copy paper, which is a humongous increase in terms of the cost. So, and we're not even talking about things like transportation and tuition. It's just some of the basic staples of the operation, and the numbers, the estimated numbers are crazy. So, I'm doing some projections. I can look at $3 a gallon. I think that's way under. I can look at $3.25 a gallon. On a personal note, I did receive oil the other day, and I think it was actually about $3.25. But certainly when you've got 20 districts and a million plus gallons, hopefully it's going to be a little bit better. So there's a lot of balls up in the air. There are many unknowns. The state budget isn't due out for a couple of weeks. So on the revenue side, we're not going to know the revenues until the end of the month. And again, contractual obligations, as we had stated publicly a few weeks ago, the step increases, I believe, were approximately $750,000. And again, these are just to open the doors, so to speak. And I think that the big nut is certainly salaries and stipends and the health insurance, both active and retirees. But we defer to the committee. We're welcome to hear your thoughts, your guidance. Maybe I mix in the school choice conversation here. I think it's going to be important again this year that we look to bring forward.
Can we hold a second before we go out to the next item?
I was going to mix it in. I'm sorry.
But in terms of some of the things you've already said, I know these are conversations we've had in the past, but if you have an envelope on your desk, if you could turn it over for a little back of the envelope exercise, since you used one of Chair Dennis's terms of the big nut there, I'll use another one of his to talk about exposure, right, in terms of what we're looking at potentially. So if we think about first the insurance increase, right? What is roughly a 1% increase in our insurance? So if we're thinking 10 to 14% is a range, what's a percent?
Ken, it's about $160,000 approximately per percent.
So 100.
So, I did some initial projections, and if we landed at 12% increase without any offsets, without redirecting funds to school choice or to school lunch or what have you, we're looking at a 2 million plus increase in health insurance.
All right. For the next question, in terms of back of the envelope, again, this is you're not interviewing for consultancy here, but how many gallons of oil do we use a year, give or take? I'm just kind of curious to see like what a $1 per gallon increase or
Approximately 400,000 gallons, approximately off the top of my head.
So 400,000 gallons of oil a year. So we were paying, like, was it $1.79? That's the number that's in my.
It was dollar. It was $1.69. It was an incredible number. We were so fortunate.
So $1.70, right?
Okay.
So we're looking at, if it was 3, which is hopefully the high range, that's that's a big number, right? So that's like almost $600,000, $500,000 to $600,000 increase in oil costs, right? Doing that back of the envelope calculation.
Yeah, like 520. Yeah.
So we're gonna keep our fingers crossed. Again, going out to bid. I mean, the document's out there, and hope we'll know in early February.
So I'm just going to jump in real quick. When you start to look at some of the oil futures and stuff like that that's going on, they're not anticipating oil prices really going down very much. I do not see us getting a number that's much lower than probably what Dan paid for his own heating oil. Maybe 320, maybe 315 if we're really lucky, but we're going to have to project out pretty darn high. They're really saying that I think oil went up 47% December to December last year. Heating oil in particular was even higher. So we're going to have to plan accordingly. So it's $500,000 to $600,000 at least in terms of an increase there. And we are probably going to have to start looking at some of the money that we had at times been able to save and carry over. But this is why we do this. This is why we have some of that money available to us in school choice so that we can offset some of these, just enormous costs that are, we don't want it to break the bank.
One of the things that the district didn't do in the past, but we've been fortunate, I think, the past 2 years, is that we've been able to top off our tanks at the end of the year. So, this year we're at $1.60, let's call it $1.70. We can top off those tanks and, help us to get through at least October or early November at the latest. It won't go much beyond that. Then, we would tap into next year's oil. But we've been fortunate, again, to do that. And we'll be looking at that, and I might be looking to do a transfer into operations and maintenance to add money to fuel, so we can do that. That'll help a little bit for sure. I don't know where the tanks are at. I'll need to get with Mr. Wild on that, but that would be very helpful in June to do that if we can. Sure.
So, I mean, as we start turning to this conversation, and I'll go to Kamara in just a second, I do think, Chair Dennis put, budget calendars and such on our agenda for the last meeting. I wasn't at, but in terms of budget retreats and all, but I do think that we as subcommittee, administration, full committee, are going to have to start asking some difficult pencil sharpening questions in terms of, it's all well and good to say, okay, well, we're going to use carryover money. That's why we have carryover money to account for this. Like, just looking at the oil itself, a $600,000 increase. Historically, a $3.25 per gallon isn't exceedingly high, right? I mean, like, it's been $4 something since I've been on the committee. Maybe not for the district, but at the gas tank. So I just want to caution us about, using one-time money, carry forward money for something that's probably a structural element to the budget for 24. So, we may want to be thinking about, how do we reduce expenses and other lines, maybe not the full increase, right? But at least a part of it to start building some future planning into bringing that into the budget, the general fund, and not just carry forward money. Kumar, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, so we don't have any way to stockpile oil, do we?
I would
No.
discourage trash bag
No.
in the truck. We're doing when there was those gas shortages.
No,
No, we
no. So that's
we don't have a tank. I think I know what you're asking. We don't have
Yeah.
a tank someplace like in back of ECC where we can put 500 gallons of oil. No, we don't.
Because
And
the
let's
reason
and I'm sorry. And again, I know we're talking about oil because that's the big nut. But we also have buildings using natural gas and electricity.
Yeah.
But the big nut is obviously the oil.
So even topping off the tanks, that's kind of a tricky. We don't even really know what that would get us, right?
It
Yeah.
would probably save us the first delivery in October or the first delivery in September. It would be in essence, one delivery.
Yeah.
That might be the extent of it at the most.
Gotcha. Perfect.
And again, that comes back to bite you in 24, right? If gas prices don't go back down. So another reason to kind of not be throwing it all to top off the tanks and use carry forward money, but to be thinking, okay, this is our new normal. Let's plan accordingly, right? And spread the pain over 2 years, sure, but don't ignore the pain this year and put it all off till next year, because otherwise it's worse. Dana?
Danny, you're muted. Danny, you're muted.
Yeah, as I was just saying, I've been coughing all day, so my brain is not working at full capacity. Can you hear me? It's a very small, maybe a dumb question. This is the first I heard of parents being reimbursed for driving their kids to school during COVID.
So Dana, it wasn't, they weren't being reimbursed to drive their kids to school. It was when the kids, they were students who were out of district students. When we didn't have our van transportation in September and October. So some families decided, they drove their students to school and they were reimbursed for that. But it wasn't, we're not doing anything special for the in-district ones.
Okay, it was out of district. Thanks.
Yep.
And the out of district, that's true all the time. There might just have been more, right? But parents who choose to drive their students out of district are always reimbursed, and it probably saves the district money per kid.
Yes.
Yeah, they do that.
Chris, you're muted. Chris.
Sorry, guys. So if we're running a bus to that school, then we're not obligated to reimburse. So sometimes that's an IEP table decision. Like if the student has additional needs, that really it would cost a monitor and all kinds of additional issues or expenses, and the parent is able to, then sometimes that arrangement is made. But typically, we absorb that cost on our vehicles.
So do you want to talk about school choice, Dan, and then we can maybe spin back to thinking about what our plans are? I mean, I apologize, this was discussed in depth on Monday. We don't talk about it again if that was the case, but what our plans are for our budget retreats and meetings going forward as well.
Sure thing. So Again, historically, the district has used school choice as an offset for insurance, for the insurances, and certainly that can be the case next year if you choose to. One of the one of the things that I've done the past couple years, though, is, as the committee knows, for the veteran members, is that we've been able to bring forward a balance. From 20 to 21, for example, we brought forward approximately $370,000, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. So right now, we have a balance in school choice of $822,864. As I have stated in the past to the committee, the DESE does make mid-year adjustments on school choice in receipts and also school choice out assessments. So they've made that adjustment in December. And from July through November, we were being paid approximately $26,000 in change. They made the first adjustment, and there'll be a second adjustment later on in the spring. Again, we've talked about this, but we've gone from 26K in essence to approximately 15K. December payment was 15,000 and change. So I'm projecting out, for the final 6 months of the year, that school choice receipts will be a little bit over $91,000, $91,344. If we don't touch school choice for the rest of the year, and again, we don't make the chargebacks, for example, our estimated receipts for the year would be $914,208, $914,208. If you want to talk about really, really round numbers, we're looking at a little bit under $1 million. If we don't touch that. And again, these are my projections, and I would argue too that we hold on to this and that we use this big number as an offset, for insurances again in FY23, similar to what we did with circuit breaker. And again, you've got more flexibility with the use of school choice funds. In essence, anything's relative to instruction, if you will. And again, when we've talked about this in the past briefly, I said, the only thing they can't use school choice for, if you will, is for construction. If you're going to build a science lab, that's appropriate. So I think, that would certainly be very helpful as an offset into FY 23. But again, that depending upon, again, I'm just suggesting this, and depending upon how the budget process goes, that's one-time revenue, because as our school choice numbers decrease every year, the revenues are going to go down as well, to the point where with those students out there, that revenue will not be coming in. So just something that we just need to keep on our radar, similar to circuit breaker. Again, if we can bring forward a balance in our presentation to the towns back in December, we did, talk about a very conservative figure for circuit breaker. I work with Christine and her staff. We monitor tuitions all the time. And as I've talked to this committee in the past, one of the unknowns with the tuitions are the waiting list students. And when I do my projections, I always factor that number into my projections. So 914 change estimated, estimated for the year. If we don't touch it, that could certainly help us for 23. If those numbers hold.
So two quick things just to lead off conversation. That's all right. One is trying to fix my memory basically around my kid in some way, but I feel like all of our school choice kids are mostly in high school now. Is that fair? Like, I don't think there's a lot of school choice kids left there's no elementary school kids left, right? And
No, they're middle school kids. They're still middle school. Yeah.
So, but not. Are we like talking seventh? I'm just wondering, like, when is it gone?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me. It's just going to keep whittling down. So it will probably be gone in 6 years, I'd say.
And it's going down arithmetically, as well. And my assumption is that, of course, we always lose a few kids in the high school who go back to, private schools or where they came from,
Right.
or just move. Things happen. I think since you're here for this meeting, and I'm sure it's on your radar as the year goes on, but I think the committee has to have a conversation that's a difficult dialogue this year, and this might be an opportunity for a service to the district in your last year to have a difficult dialogue with us about this topic. I know it's been a little bit of a third rail in the committee in terms of bringing school choice students in targeted ways. And there's the whole marginal cost thing when they're K-8, and then there's it does cost money when they're 9-12, right? Most likely. But I think an analysis of that is warranted, and not just a quick, we don't want school choice, because I think though the cliff is looming in terms of either A, y'all need to build 1/6 of this money into the general fund every year for the next 6 years, and the assumption that the money is going to be gone in 6 years, which is probably the realistic way to approach it. Or we need to have a difficult dialogue as a committee to say, are there targeted places where we can, for 8 years, get some money out of these kids and service them well, realizing it's probably going to cost us in the last 4 years, when they're in the high school, and we lose the marginal cost argument for their presence in the district, just looking at them as dollars and not as, of course, the little people that they are. But I think that's a difficult dialogue with a particularly highly new subcommittee in general that we have, a lot of new members, that we need to frame this whole, when do they cost what? Like when is it profitable, when is it not profitable, and when is the breakover of that. So I would strongly suggest that the superintendent, or if he wants to pass it through this committee first, when we talk about school choice this year, that we really have that discussion.
And Ken,
Yeah.
I think we've talked about school choice many times over the years, and there are targeted ways in which we could put students into some of our schools where we have space available. We could, you get a dollar amount for each one of those students that comes in. And at one time, our district brought in basically $1 million a year in school choice funds. And that was pre me becoming superintendent. And it was very helpful. As Ken mentioned, what did happen was we had, it all kind of pyramids up at the high school. So it's fine when they're all spread out amongst the elementary schools and the middle schools, but when they all hit the high school, that's the cost benefit analysis that's challenging. And I think a decision was made several years ago to say it's not worth it anymore. Let's stop it, and let's see what happens. So as kids have graduated, oftentimes we also have kids who are K-8 kids who are in our school district, but then they don't matriculate to the high school because they want to remain in their own community. So that does happen. We could definitely talk about this. Again, my concern is always one where I have Bill Biando in my ear, where he's constantly telling me that, hey, listen, if we want to keep our school a top-notch school and our programming where it is, we want to ensure that we have the capacity to keep our classes somewhat manageable in terms of size. And there are times when we have some really large classes, no matter what, large math classes, English classes, especially the ones that all of our juniors, or freshmen and sophomores take. So we could take a look at this. I know we could do it tomorrow, and we could find spots for kids in lots of classrooms throughout the district. Just know that down the road, well after I'm gone, there will be something to pay. And I think like Ken mentioned, maybe 6 to 8 years from now, you'd have another school committee saying, "Oh, okay, that's it, we're all done." It's cyclical in that sense.
Well,
So my question was related, actually, when you were talking about school choice. My question went to the size issue because I know we have a couple schools that are not, but I know the high school is crowded. I know, I mean, this is a random thing, but I know I've heard from a few parents this year that wanted to bring exchange students into our community, and we're told that they couldn't, which is a cultural benefit to a lot of people, and have been told for many years we can't because we simply don't have space at the high school to accommodate 1 or 2 students that would enrich our community and education. And so knowing those types of things, that's where my brain goes. Like, it's very, I just want to make sure we would factor that in, because I just don't know that we have space. We hear about overcrowding in some of our advanced classes in particular every year. And I want to make sure all that's included and we really have that big picture, because that's what I hear. And then of course in Holden, there is no room in the elementary schools. So, I mean, I just want to make sure we have all that data, because I think that goes hand in hand with kind of the enrollment discussion that we started on Monday, you know, in our towns and what's going on and what's projected. And so we just need to have a detailed discussion about all of that.
So Malaya, you bring up some really good points. And I think ultimately when we're looking at this, we want to talk about where we're at in reference to, like you said, Holden has not been able to, even prior to us no longer doing school choice, we'd stopped school choice in Holden pretty much wholesale. Mount View in particular was really tough, especially before the new building was built. But Mount View still can't, you know, hold any students. You know, we're maxed out right now. So when we're talking about these other places, we might be talking about a Paxton, a Princeton, maybe a Rutland school, Sterling, for example. So we could probably put kids into different classrooms in different spaces. I literally used to do this as part of my job as deputy superintendent, where I'd place kids into classes based upon you know, the requests of parents, as well as, you know, what the principals were saying. But what that did allow us to do was strategically put kids in spaces that were, you know, we weren't going to really break the barriers of the class size, you know, rule that we follow. But at the high school level, one of the things we have to look at, especially starting with the NESDEC information, is where are we at with those, you know, with grade 5, with grade 6, with grade 7, grade 8, and then take into account the fact that we're probably going to lose 12, 13, 14, maybe 15% of 8th graders. You know, they'll just move off and they'll go to private schools or whatever. They won't end up moving on to 9th grade. So all of that would come into play. So there are ways for us to calculate that. But again, it's always in the back of my mind, the concern around what would happen at the high school, because the high school, again, physically, it's 375,000 square feet, but just small classrooms.
Yeah, it's just a concern. And I know, I was thinking back about grade levels. I know that we had classmates in my son's grade that were school choiced in from Worcester. 3 of the families I know now live in Holden, so they're no longer school choice students. But I know that grade we did, and they're freshmen at the high school this year. So I know at least that year. I don't know if the class after that we still had it, but at least that year we did, historically. So
yeah, the reason I brought this third rail up is that, you know, we use this school choice money, you know, for purposes, and we just have to be planning, and I'm sure Dan is, for the fact that this well is leaking, right, every year at a steady rate, and we can see the bottom, right, and we just need to factor in the fact that it's likely going away as a revenue source, and we'll still, of course, have the unrelated expense of school choice outs, which is another kettle of fish for another day. So getting back to budget planning, I don't know if people have other questions about school choice. So, Kumar?
Yeah, just, I guess so much as just a commentary. If I'm understanding correctly, even if we brought in X number of students, and let's assuming too that they're going to matriculate past a certain point, there really is no guarantee, if I'm understanding that correctly. Is that correct?
There's no guarantee that they will what?
Oh, that they will actually stay even for 1 year, 2 year. I mean, yeah.
No,
Right.
so I can tell you, we would not have an issue if we were to open up school choice. We could easily fill 100 to 200 spots probably with families who from surrounding communities and even farther, who would want to send their kids in. There are more people who have homes on whose whose part of their house is in Worcester, part of their house is in Holden, or their property in Holden, but they live in Worcester. We literally get something every couple of weeks from someone that wants their child to they want to have their child come to school here, so that wouldn't be the issue. So again, I think really the issue is, as Ken mentioned, is what happens when they all make their way to the high school.
I don't know. Thank you. That's really good to know. Because I was just a little nervous about how long-term sustainable would even like 25 kids be if I put in a series of unfortunate circumstances for us as a district, but for those families are X number of reasons. So that's why I was wondering. But I guess I took out the equation that the interest and desire is still there. It never really
Yes.
went away. Okay.
No, we get calls every day, pretty much, from families saying, "Oh, can we?" I mean, I just was dealing with an email today with someone about wanting to have their student come here, and they live on the Worcester Holden border.
Cool.
Why do you have a follow-up?
It's just related to that I just occurred to me that yes, while we do have that demand now, we also have 2 housing developments under development, for example, in Holden, one of which is, they keep dragging it out, but it'll probably be here in like 3 years. I would not be shocked. We have one of condos and one of something like over 100 units of housing, duplexes and triplexes, off of Bailey Road in that area. And that's a lot of kids that aren't probably factored into any reports, but that is coming. They're dragging it out, but it's coming. And so I guess that's the other challenge, that we can't lose sight of those things that aren't on any piece of paper. They're probably not even in the NASDAQ projections. I wonder how they handle those, but since they're not being built yet, they're probably not on their radar. But those are a lot of families that are going to be coming into our district that we have to consider. So,
Dana?
But $1 million is a lot of money. So I'd be interested in working with someone or committee, or just doing a little look into this third rail issue, as Ken said. This is interesting information, so just throwing that out there. Me looking more kind of at the numbers.
Yeah, and I do think it's definitely worth our while to take a look at this, to see feasibly what it would do for us financially. We know what it would do for us financially. There'd be an immediate infusion of funds. It's just, again, it's that long-term effect. I actually have to, I've got to run, but I guess one of the things I'd just like to make sure, we do is, when, as we kind of talk through our different ideas around the budget and where we're at, I want to make sure that we get as much input from this group, in terms of where you're at, because again, when Dan and the principals and Jane and Chris and when we're all talking about the budget and kind of behind the scenes, we need that feedback from you, and this is really the venue for that. So again, I appreciate you all taking the time tonight to talk us through some of this stuff.
And this is just me, Daryl, and I know others thinking you need to go. I do think you all need to sharpen your pencils and start thinking about, the fact that we can't necessarily say opening the doors is where we start. I think we're going to have to make some painful looks at places where we might need to make some reductions. Our towns are doing the same, and we're relying on school choice. We're relying on things that are going away, and huge increases in things we can't avoid, like oil.
Right.
I don't think we can just dance our way around it. I think we have to have difficult dialogues about parts of the
Yeah,
budget.
I agree, and I can tell you we're getting kind of budgets from principals, requests, conversations around materials and staffing and so forth. But we do know that we're going to be extremely limited on adding any new staff this coming school year. Our numbers don't necessarily justify new staff, in the sense that we're not necessarily growing that much. So anything that is requested, we're going to really take a very close look at, and there are going to have to be offsets for those things. And I'm not talking about one time like offsets. If it's a person in this position, then we're going to have to think about, well, we might have to take someone away from this particular position in order to do the offset. And those are the challenging, difficult decisions, and this is when it all kind of happens. But yeah, we'll definitely pull all that together, and next time around, that's what we'll be talking with all of you about.
And if we take strategies to like what Dan's saying of filling up the oil tanks, or buying materials ahead of time, whether it be computers or what have you, I think those conversations should come to us too. I mean, not like small dollar things, but like if we're making significant investments from this year's funds to offset next year's funds, I think that's something that y'all would want to bring through.
Definitely, yeah. Okay, thank you all.
So I'm sorry, I just was rambling. Do other people have things they want to put on the table for planning? So Dan, sorry, go ahead.
I just keep thinking of how basically every business and finance meeting we're discussing the Medicaid person who came in and has really increased our receipts and made us a lot of money. Is there any benefit to finding other people like that, like say in a grant position, writing position, or in, some type of data analysis position that will look like a hit on the budget, adding a staff member, but then will in the end up, increasing what we're bringing in? Because I know that we don't, grants we can't rely on for a lot of things, but I would think that, grants for professional development, grants for, purchasing like big systems of curriculum, stuff like that. I just wonder if adding a staff person like that would help. I mean, I'm just trying to think of anything that will help as I think about this budget year coming.
Just something off the top of my head, but I think to your point, Lauren, is again, we've talked a lot about this at previous meetings and certainly in facilities, and we mentioned it very briefly tonight, but there are other opportunities out there. And again, FEMA, for example, I've become very good friends with. We have a local rep who's kind of guiding me through these potential funds, and as Chair Mills knows, and as Malaya knows, we submitted a grant application, I don't know, was it a year and a half ago, whatever it was, for $129,000 and change. And as I said earlier tonight, it took us literally almost a year to be reimbursed, but we got $112,000. And so those opportunities are out there. They certainly come my way. They're not easy. That was a year-long process. But I think that's certainly without bringing another body in to look to tap these resources, and what, just so that and I think we've talked about this, that $112,000 went into a revolving fund, which can sit there, can bring it forward year to year. We should use it for building related expenses, and we have. But that's one venue. Something else, and I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, if you will, is maybe looking at building rentals, if you will. You gotta make a buck to break even, and we're not looking at significant dollars, but having that money, and there isn't a lot in those accounts, but certainly those dollars could be used to offset operation and maintenance accounts in buildings, but we're not talking thousands and thousands. That's something else. And again, I'm just kind of brainstorming here in response to your question.
Okay.
Malaya, do you have anything?
I had a couple things. I actually was going to mention those exact two things because no surprise, I've mentioned them before. And I think it would be, those are areas where I think of not just that we are accessing grant things now with Dan's time, but how much time is that taking? The other thing that I wondered about if we were to start looking at part-time things that would improve efficiencies, is that most districts our size have a transportation coordinator, for example, and I think of how long it's taken Dan to, I'm not looking for ways to add staff. I'm just stating things that might benefit us in the long run. Because I think of all the time that Dan has to take away from his normal work to make all these phone calls related to transportation, for example. And it's just, I'm just thinking of things that may be useful if we are thinking creatively about other ways to spend small pockets of money or small-ish part-time pockets of money, or, you know,
So
I don't know.
we actually, Malay, we do have a transportation coordinator, if you will. That's Mrs. Holden in my office. That's one of her tasks.
Okay.
She does transportation. She works with me in procurement. But the way it works is that usually, I would say 10 times out of 10, when there's a problem, it crosses my desk. That's why in our past meetings, I've talked about checking bus stops or meeting with parents. That's my job. That's my job. I mean, she'll meet with parents, she'll discuss the stop, and that doesn't always work. So then it ends up with me. Now, if you want to take it off my plate.
No, I mean, I'm not looking, it sounds like I'm looking for ways to spend money, and I'm really not. I'm trying to think of if there are things that we can do more efficiently that then would allow the staff we do have currently to do
I understand.
other things. And if we have people dedicated to, for example, grants or data, that's things that other people can then focus on their regular jobs. Like I know Dan and I know Brendan does a ton with, actually all of our staff in central office do a lot of data collection, that if we had a data person, even part-time, could help do some of that, for example, and save a lot of time and probably give us information that would help us utilize our funds differently or access new funding, if we had someone who had time to do those things. So it's just a thought. My other question, it's probably more detail than we can get into today, but I was curious when we're thinking of one-time funds. I know last year when we originally approved the SOA plan, we had psychologists and counselors under that. And then at some point they were moved to one of the ESSER grants. And I don't believe those staff are going away. So I would want to make sure we are maintaining that funding. And if there are other areas of staffing that had been moved to ESSER grants, make sure we are still covering them in some way. So that's just a practical point.
One of the problems with a stimulus grant, again, my term, and I'm probably dating myself, but I'm going back, almost 12 years ago when the ARRA funds were out there and the economy had tanked then as well, is that, when you put bodies into grants, it creates potential funding cliff because that money goes away. Malay, I apologize. I'm drawing a blank on those positions being in an ESSER grant. I apologize.
I think it was like August when Daryl brought to the whole school committee an update. I think it was August or early September. Those like
about the SOA grant.
4 positions that had been under SOA were moved to one of the ESSER grants. And I never really got a clear answer, because I pay attention to this, to what then happened to the SOA funds. But regardless, we have these positions that it struck me that they were under SOA funds, which is regular kind of streaming. We wouldn't be losing, and they were moved to ESSER funds because under social emotional learning or something of that sort. And then, what happens to those positions and that money? I guess it's a very small piece of our whole budget, but it is something I wanted to bring up because obviously we don't want to be losing counselors and psychologists. We actually need more of them, but I want to make sure we're not. It struck me because of the fiscal cliff issue, because it was unusual. We were moving them to a grant. it didn't go through school committee or anyone. It just showed up on one of the updates that we got on the grants in the early fall. So I wanted to find out what happened, what is going to happen with those positions, how they're going to be funded in the next year, and hopefully not through a one-time grant, because I'd like to think they'll be around for a while.
Let me, Malaya, I'll check on that. I'll get back to you, get back to the committee on that one.
Thank you.
I maintain just one position in my special education early childhood grant, and that's in order to meet one of the requirements of the grant itself. So, you know, using a grant to pay a salary is not only not beneficial because the grant could disappear, but also because you end up paying retirement costs in multiple ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we've pulled most of those people out. Jean has a question. She may also be using grant.
And
funds.
I know I missed part of your presentation, but I know the 240 grant that allows for staffing, and that's a whole different kind of grant though. So I was just curious about these one-time things.
Yep.
So thank you for looking into that, whoever will do that.
Yeah, I think looking at all three ESSER grants, but ESSER 3, I can say there's no staff in there that will be needed to be funded next year. So not in ESSER 3. We did pay for interfaith, which is that outside interface, excuse me, which is the counseling, the contract for outside counseling, but not any counselors, no staff for ESSER 3, at least.
Okay. Well, that's good. I think I said it was false. It was probably under one or two, probably two. I just need to make sure that those are being absorbed somewhere.
And Malaya, I do know for this year, it was late in the budget process, but we did add to the general fund for 22 the counselors that were hired late last summer. So they're in the general fund. But again, I wrote a note here, and I'm going to get back, and we're looking at probably ESSER 1 or ESSER 2. And as this group knows, we spent a lot of money in those grants, on the investments, to use Ken's term, between technology and operations, and frankly, I think it was the ESSER 1 grant. I'll stand corrected, but we had put like $200,000 into unemployment, and that helped us tremendously last year, because we got that first bill. I'll never forget it. I know Mr. Carlson's on the phone here, on the call here, but we had that first bill. It was like $275,000. We had in our budget, like $75,000. So that helped tremendously. But got a note, and I'll report back to the committee.
So Dan, in terms of budget planning and a later item on the agenda, which is next meeting, can we think through kind of leading off of what Daryl said right before he left, in terms of, getting feedback from this committee before we go to full committee, right, with documents of when you see us meeting again and what you see doing with us, so that, business finance has a chance to kind of weigh in on the documents that you'd be presenting to full school committee before they see them.
So right now, the ball's in the principal's court to develop their budgets for next year, and those documents are due fairly soon. I myself, I'm working independent of them. Also, I'm just looking at some of the bigger ticket items. I'm working with Mr. Carlson on the salaries, for example. I believe the deadline is the 21st, that we'll have everything assembled, although a number of principals have already submitted their information, and I'm tallying that information. I'd like to circle back with Superintendent McCall, but I'm thinking probably have another meeting towards the latter part of the month. And at that point, on the revenue side, we'll probably have a sense as to where the state revenues may land. At least the governor's house one, we all know that those numbers change. And certainly we'll have a pretty good sense of our tuitions, of our utilities, well, almost of our utilities, of our debts. The assessments, we have to wait. The school choice out, the child assessments, we have to wait for the cherry sheets to come out on that. We can certainly present to you, I say a rough draft, but a preliminary budget to be drilled down some more. But I think by the end of the month we could have something for you. Nothing fancy yet, but just some initial numbers. And again, I'll be working with Mr. Carlson. We need to adopt a number for the insurances. Do we go with the 12%, knowing that it might be reduced, or do we take the full 14% potential increase and go with that, which I don't think is going to happen. I mean, I don't have I don't have tarot cards here to project that, but just given the history and working with our provider, he'll always say, here's your range. Let me do what I need to do, and then he does his magic working with providers, and then we end up with a number. That's a very brief explanation, but I think if we use 12%, that's probably not a bad place to begin, and then work down. I'm sorry, Ken.
So I'm just going back and looking, trying to find Mike's email from earlier in the week. So he talked about a pre-budget meeting on February 7th, right? So I would think we would want to meet before that, but probably after House 1 comes out on the 26th, right? Because I think the statute deadline is January 26th, which is a Wednesday, right? For the governor's budget. So just thinking, putting those pieces together, the week of the 31st seems to make sense to me, where when in my mind would be coming to us, it doesn't have to be pretty and fancy, but you've got probably to send that out by that Friday to the school committee to show them, here's what our preliminary presentation is. If you get input, you need to be able to either say, yeah, that's nice, or hopefully incorporate some of that input before you send it out to the committee. So I would think, we have a full committee meeting on the 31st. I would think it has to be the first or the second, right? That we would get together in the subcommittee and really hash through what you're going to share the next week. Malay, do you have?
Well, my only question was that, and I can't find the date right now, so I obviously didn't put it on my calendar, but I know that Mike also said we are actually having a budget retreat. And when is that, and how does that fit into this? Does that
He has it on the 15th
of January.
February.
Oh, okay. Which is after. Okay. I assumed that would be before the administration put together their budget, so that the whole committee had input into what their priorities are. So I was a little confused about the timeline of how that fit in.
So what Mike has now is he has pre-budget meeting on the 7th, budget retreat on the 15th. These are all February dates. Budget hearing on the 28th, and the budget vote on March 7th.
Okay.
So I mean, the committee, I don't know what pre-budget means for you, Dan, in terms of what your intention is on the February 7th meeting to share with the full committee.
Yeah.
So in the past, we've given the full committee a brief update on the budget as to where it is, and sought their input. Ken, I think it's going to be real tight, because don't forget what we haven't talked about here is that then we have meetings with the towns, and there were meetings that had been booked that have been canceled just because it just didn't work out. And I think now we're looking to have those meetings with the towns. I think it's the week of school vacation. I have to check the schedule. So I think administration is probably with input from the principals, is going to have a tentative document. I think we're going to have a tentative document before the budget retreat. I think that's
Right.
going to be too late.
So
I mean, we'll take the input, but we're going to have something in place.
I have a question which is beyond us. I mean, I don't know what the 7th is intended to be, but I feel like the problem we have run into in the past, and the whole reason we asked for budget retreat, which I know is beyond just us, it's up to Mike as well, was that we wanted a chance for the committee to hear some of what the administration was thinking their priorities were, or the things they were balancing, not just, you know, staffing and the things we know are going up, but the balance of other expenses. And then also have a chance to hear from the school committee members what our thoughts are on whether we need it's new positions or academic programs or whatever the issues were that the school committee felt were important before the actual budget was developed, which then was discussed and presented to the towns. I thought that was the intent of having a retreat. So I'm not trying to complicate things. I'm just trying to make sure that it's not another case where we're having a retreat after the budget's decided and they're, you know, this subcommittee has to have a voice and the whole committee will have an opinion before we get to the finalized line item budget things that we then present to the towns and other places.
Yeah, I think the challenge, you know, and I'm not saying what's good or bad, I'm just saying where we are in the calendar on January, whatever today is, 13th, is that historically, when we had those budget retreats, you know, in the way back, they were like January 4th or 6th or something along those lines. And they were good and bad. I mean, they were good in the sense that the committee got its priorities on the table. They were bad in the fact that they often were, you know, 20 or 30 or $40 million of priorities, right? So, and when we would ask administration this before Dan, well, how much would something like that cost? They're like, well, we'll have to get a lot, right? And then a lot of it didn't appear in the budget because there were already constraints, right, in terms of like of operating over expenses. So I think at least from my perspective, the sequencing of it's always hard. I think you're right. The sequencing is late. Like by February 15th, I don't think there's any way we can expect Dan to be radically changing
the budget.
The budget, at least not in terms of you know, we don't approve as a school committee, you know, like we think that, although sometimes we act like it, you know, that Daryl should hire a 2nd grade teacher and a counselor and not a 6th grade teacher. I mean, we just approve appropriation lines, right? And it's administrative responsibility to distribute them with our guidance and suggestions. But so obviously there could still be changes within those appropriation lines, right, of what priorities might be. But I'm in agreement with you that a budget retreat on the 15th of February, we need to, I would encourage us or encourage us to talk to Mike about, you know, what we think the agenda for such a retreat would be and its purpose, right? Because it is a little bit late in the game to do what it used to do, which is like, hey, let's build this in, let's build
And I was
in.
confused on what the 7th was then, because I didn't have that detail that he wanted to be a pre-budget meeting. So what does he mean by that exactly, and how is this involved?
I'm just reading it from the whole committee on Monday, right?
Okay, so I missed that line. Anyways.
Yeah. Lauren, do you have an input into that?
Yeah, just quickly, as one of the people that's been beating the drum for a budget retreat since I got on the committee, I do, you know, when I saw it come on the 15th, and even before I saw the date of it, I was thinking at this point, with the information that we know, is there really much that is going to come out of it besides a discussion of what, you know, the priorities of our committee would be? But is there any, you know, really deep input that we're going to be able to give that's really, really going to affect the budget with the situation that, you know, the towns are in and we're all in? So, yeah, I agree about maybe touching base with Mike about the retreat in general.
And you know, sometimes, you know, priorities aren't priorities of things to add, but priorities are priorities of things to retain, right? And That's another approach, unfortunately, we could take to this meeting of, you know, what's not cuttable. Um, if we're going to need to reduce something to make up $600,000 here, $1 million there.
And I just feel like at least the initial level of that really needs to happen before Dan and the rest of administration spend their time putting together the detail of what they think should be cut or not. That's why I'm kind of stuck, but it's fine. I'll let you all figure it out.
I mean,
but that's my concern.
I can ask Mike what his thinking of that is, or if Dan, if you want to, but yeah, I do think we'd want to think, but this is why I'm bringing up under this item, right, is, you know, budget planning. You know, these meetings are one right after the other. I'm not exactly sure, as we've said, pre-budget versus budget retreat. And then, you know, when we ping in and what data we'll have to review before them. I mean, I think in terms of a next meeting, Dan, you know, I don't know what your calendar looks like, but I would think it would be whatever pre-budget means for February 7th. I think this committee has to meet before that's shared with the full committee. And I kind of think it would be more useful if you had the governor's budget in your hand, which still leads me to think the first or the second is the day we have to have that meeting, whatever it is, unless you have other obligations those nights.
No, I mean, as you all know, this is what we do from January to June. It's as simple as that. So, and I agree with you. I think that it'll be helpful to have those numbers, especially on the revenue side, you know, relative to Chapter 78, relative to the projected reimbursement for regional education, but also on the expense side, you know, we have one appropriation that's based solely upon the governor's numbers, school choice out and the charter school assessment. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that let's just, you know, what is it, February 2nd? I think that's I think we'll have some information if we have a vendor for oil. So we'll know if we're taking a $600,000 increase or is it $800,000, whatever. Being a little bit facetious, but you know, clearly we need to be prepared for a number. And given the fact that we've done one procurement, got no bids, is worrisome to me. I will say this: I did share that information with the chair, and you know, something I'm going to need to keep in my back pocket is that maybe I need to go out to bid alone, Wachusett. If that second procurement doesn't work out, then I'll have to go out to bid. But the problem is, you know, I got what did I say, $300,000 to $400,000 gallons of oil, 300,000 to 400,000 gallons of oil, as opposed to 2 million gallons of oil with 20 districts. You get my point. And so I think, you know, that could be a little bit problematic. But you know, I will be prepared. I will be prepared to do that. But I'm afraid that the cost will be greater than if I work with my other 19 districts. So
I don't disagree, but I think you have to be prepared to do that because you eventually have to do it, right? And it does possibly open the door to some smaller providers who might be more expensive as well, but you know, there may be some providers who are incapable of delivering, you know, 900,000 gallons of oil, but might be able to, you know, deliver 200,000 gallons of oil. I mean, it's a different scope and scale of an operation, right? To do those sort of things. So am I hearing you say the bid is the 2nd? Is that when it's due, February 2nd?
The bid's actually due, I think it's the 31st, but the award, we have a couple of days to make the award. You know, the other thing too, Ken, is that I could put a procurement out now and just pull it back. I could go out separately now and cancel it. I have to talk to my colleague and make her aware of what I might be doing. Again, unfortunately this year it's such a potentially big hit to the budget. You know, several $100,000 potentially. You know, it's a lot of teachers that we might not be hiring.
I think that's a question that's starting to dribble into micromanaging on our end. I mean, I think we have to let you use your judgment in terms of how you're going to
Yeah.
But in terms of a date, then would that mean that February 2nd might be more useful, because if you might be making an award, you'd have made it and we can talk about it that night? Is that a fair?
Yes. Yep.
That's a Wednesday.
Yep.
It is. I will definitely be remote if it's the 2nd, and I hope I will make it to you all. I'm supposed to be on an airplane that day, but I should be able to be remote by this time of night, COVID permitting.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll hope that this subcommittee can be in person. I wanted to make sure we had quorum tonight, and I think there is an element of transparency. Things are live streamed. It's possibly even better than when we're in a basement room. And I know the business office has had its issues this, recently with
yeah. There is. I just wanted to let you know that I will definitely be remote because I'm going to be in California.
So whether we're hybrid or full remote, we can deal with when the time approaches. But 6:30 on a Wednesday, the February 2nd, and then the main objective there, Dan, I think is probably the only thing we'll handle, frankly, is what does pre-budget mean, right? What are you sharing with the school committee probably 2 days later, right? In Daryl's report on Friday. Getting some input from that into that document. So we'll need to see it, a little bit ahead of time. Presumably it'll incorporate some of the government budget, right, in the revenue side, which, assuming the cherry sheets come out on the 26th or the 27th, probably the 27th, yeah, they're usually pretty fast with that. And at least the governor, rather than the legislature, tends to hit his deadline, whether it's a good result or not. He doesn't tend to be late like other people do. So
that's correct. Yep.
So it probably will actually come out on the 26th.
Yeah, I think it will this year. He seems to be very focused.
And Ken, can I just make one comment about the governor's budget?
Yeah.
Since the towns at the budget roundtable were all very excited about the idea of advocating for regional transportation funding, since it's one of my little pet issues, I would urge everybody to email Governor Baker's office and email your legislators and legislators and kind of ask for 100% regional transportation, because it would, amount to quite a bit usually. So it could be helpful. I know it's usually we don't usually get that, but it's always got something good to ask for. So,
and I say that it's as much respect to our legislators as I can. This year's percentage reimbursement is pretty misleading, because since they don't really approve a percentage, right? They approve a pool of money, and the percentage is really only determined once the requests for reimbursements come in. And my understanding is, since reimbursements were down, right, the transportation expenses were down, that the percentage reimbursement is high. It doesn't mean that the pool of money was high. So, and I'm sure Dan's all over this, but we want to make sure when we're assuming next year that we're basing it off of the amount of money the legislature put in last year rather than the percent reimbursement, because expenses across the Commonwealth are going to, be much higher.
They are, Ken, to your
Yeah.
To your point. I mean, one of the reasons why the expenses were down the past year or two is because districts were hybrid or what have you, or weren't in session. So, I mean, frankly, the reason why we were able to transfer at the end of 21 $1 million into transportation stabilization is because our yellow buses, as you well know, didn't start running until the middle of January, just about a year ago. And so we picked up a savings of almost, not quite, but almost a half a year. That's not the case this year. We will not be transferring $1 million to transportation stabilization. So we'll have to build that. That we really didn't get into that. We'll have to build that, a portion of that back into the budget for 23.
And I know district, but I'm sure there is some district somewhere who's going to be like, oh, we got 99% last year, let's do 90% this year, and not realize that issue and come up with a huge hole later on. So February, I've lost my calendar, but February
2nd,
right?
6:30.
6:30. Will you communicate that with Randy, Dan?
Yes, I will.
All right, and tentatively in person, hybrid, but it might be remote depending on the conditions at the time. And in ways, I almost feel like I say that it's more transparent that we're online, but we'll see what we can do.
It is. So I guess that's a question. Even if you're hybrid, is there a way to record perhaps these meetings because they're budget related and it may be something more people are interested in, and then put them online?
We did do one meeting as a subcommittee where we basically I had my computer on and recording, and although you could only see me, which isn't great, you could actually hear everybody, and you could see Dan's screen because he was sharing the screen with me. We could do something like that if we're in person, so that we can post it either by streaming or record it.
I'm just asking because of the budget meetings, there is a bigger interest by certain people, and it might be helpful.
All right, so we kind of danced around the agenda a little bit. We talked about school choice. We talked a little bit about next meeting. Before we get to approval of the minutes, are there other things we want to talk about that aren't new business?
That aren't new business? Okay, I'll hold off on that.
So the next on the agenda was the approval of the minutes. I'd actually like to just pass this over. I really only got them today, and I think they could. There was a great job that was done with them, but I think they could use a little bit of editing before we vote on them. So unless anyone objects, I want to pass it over and bring it back to the next meeting. We also never approved the minutes from October. That was an oversight. So we'll get next agenda is as well. Dan has under the thing new business. This is almost more of like an agenda item, but Dan, what do you have under new business here?
I just want to make the committee aware. I think Malaya mentioned the other night, I believe she did, if I remember correctly. I was speaking with the auditor, and for the 21 audit, the single audit, the portion of the federal audit has been pushed back 6 months until September 30 of 2022. And a lot of that has to deal with the 240 grant. It's a very large grant. Again, that's from the feds, and that's COVID related, if you will. So when the audit is completed for 21, at this point, that's not scheduled to be part of that work. They have a little bit more time to complete that work. So I just wanted to bring this group into that loop.
Other items for new business, just put it on your agenda, Dan. It might not be the right time in the next month or so, but I think we don't want to lose the idea that we need to do some housekeeping with policies. One policy for business and finance in particular that Dan's brought up before is warrant discussions / approvals at full school committee. We sign the warrants. Sometimes the approvals come minutes after they get to us, so we read them carefully, I'm sure, before we approve them. But Dan's mentioned that it's been practiced at some past places for business finance to report out on warrants at school committee meetings, which seems important. It also might seem, if there are business expenses deviations over a certain value that from what we had discussed in the budget, that maybe that gets special attention at warrant time. There is no MASC draft policy well, they have a draft policy on warrants, but it's really meant for municipal districts and not for regionals. So I don't know if Dan, in the next few months, if you can reach out in your listserv, your regional district, or ask Mars if any district has a policy on. I don't think we want to start from scratch. Has a policy on warrant approval. Because again, the draft policy isn't relevant to regional.
Will do. Yep.
Mara, do you have something else?
So yeah, just one thing. As we go forward with the budget process, and wherever it is we're gonna find we might have to make cuts, or wherever we're gonna find that services the district had this year or we're not going to have going forward. I feel as though maybe one of the things we can also do is, so when you take away services like that, you take away a teacher, you take away somebody who is spending time after school in whatever capacity we're going to define it. I don't know if there's any way we can find a creative way to put it back, but we're going to do that without spending a single dollar. So specifically, what I was thinking too was, if we can find parents who are willing to go out and get involved with that transportation part of this at the beginning of the year when they were running into that problem, I know there was some reimbursement there, but I do wonder, this broader conversation about the budget shortfalls we might be facing, in telling the community what's about to potentially happen, I feel maybe what else we can include is, okay, we might need this position, or we might need to fill this service somehow. Would there be any interested volunteers who might have any creative ways to fill that void? I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but that's just one of the things, because if we're going to say we're going to cut services and we don't have necessarily too many tools to come back and replace them with, I'm just wondering what else we could do. Just at the very least to try to resupply things that we might lose in a way that won't cost any money. I know this is probably one of the craziest things I'll ever say, but it's almost as if as crazy as this will sound, if we're going to become a district that's going to really struggle with the budget, not just this year, but in future years, I wonder what the benefit of not hiring, but like finding a way to tap into resources within the 5 towns that might be solely on an outreach / volunteer style. I know it's a crazy thing. I think I've only seen it or even heard of it in districts that like are always in the red. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the future, just in like the simplest ways.
I mean, I think we want to be cautious about having an active plan to replace, staff with volunteers. I think that, is not a direction we want to go. At least speaking for myself, we have certified, trained professionals doing professional jobs, and I guess voids might get filled by volunteers, but I don't think we should be actively trying to plan for it personally. But it may not be exactly what you meant, but yeah.
So yes, I am a certified volunteer administrator. This is my professional background. I will just throw that out there, that actually that was my comment, that I am all for creativity, but if we end up having to cut staff in some way, it's actually in traditional nonprofits, it's actually illegal to replace a paid staff with a volunteer. And schools are a little iffy, but it's frowned upon in the profession and legally. So we'd have to be super careful. I mean, if it's something like it's already existing and we're just expanding, like I know we have parents that teach after school programs and we're just expanding it, that's one thing. But it's something that could get us into some trouble in some way. But it's just a random thought. I know we're not really having that conversation yet. I'm all for creativity though. But it's just important to know.
All right, so if there's nothing else, I'd like to thank Dan and Jane and Christine and Jeff and Kim, who's been there listening in as well from the union. And we look forward to getting data, moving forward. I'm sure Dan looks forward to getting data moving forward as well from various places, be it oil or the governor or insurance, and we'll reconvene on the 2nd to review those data together, and I think moving forward, I'll also reach out to Chair Dennis and ask about the plan for the retreat. Is there anything else to do business before we adjourn? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And moved
Second.
Seconded by Lauren. So we have a roll call vote since we are remote. So Lauren?
Sammy Garrett, yes.
Oh yeah.
Gustafson, yes.
Gordon, yes.
And Mills, yes. So we are adjourned. And have a good evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. You all take care.
Bye.